The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today we will be opening the mailbag and answering a question from one of our listeners from North Carolina, a lifelong Republican, who is concerned about the two candidates, one for governor, the other for the head of the education system in North Carolina, and their ideas and their views from the past. And she wanted to know our panel's take on these two candidates. Also, a reminder, our friend and colleague, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, is still in Boston at her conference, so you will hear a little bit of background noise. We apologize for that, but her input was extremely important. So let's listen in. From North Carolina, and she is telling me that she is a lifelong registered Republican, and she's extremely concerned, especially when she hears Scott say, "Nobody's coming to rescue us." She wants to know our feelings on the Republican governor nominee, Mark Robinson, who has mentioned that freedoms were lost during the civil rights movement, and he's a black man. And the one she really wanted to know about was Michelle Merrow, who you probably have not heard of.
No, I've heard of her.
She is running for the head of the education in North Carolina. She has advocated for assassinating and public executions of Barack Obama, Biden, Schumer, and any Republican or any Democrat, and she thinks it would be great for pay-per-view. And so this young lady is asking, Scott, is anybody going to come rescue us in North Carolina if we have our electorate is actually thinking that these two would be a good choice?
Yeah, so here's what I think about North Carolina is kind of interesting. I think that, we've seen this before, crazy candidates drives up the voting turnout, and North Carolina is one of these real interesting places with the kind of a polarized, like rural, very red rural and very blue sort of hubs, technology hubs, universities and things like that. And so, the key when you're talking about a state like that is getting people to come out and vote, which is why some of the referendums, like the referendums on abortion and the referendums on cannabis, are good ways to drive young people to the polls and to get people, women certainly, to the polls. And so I think that, anything that brings out voters is going to favor Democrats because there are just more Democrats than there are Republicans. And the only time that we lose, it seems, as Democrats, and I shouldn't say we because I'm not really a Democrat, but is when the voter turnout is low. And that allows, and which is why, Republicans are engaging in a lot of voter suppression techniques and things like that, whether legal or extra legal or illegal, because I think they understand that they're the minority party in the United States right now.
Why do you think that they would think that, especially this one for the head of the education department in North Carolina, why would they think that this was an appropriate person? This isn't an appropriate person that you'd have watch your children. But you want this person to run your education system? It just seems, to me, it seems like a no-brainer.
So again, in primaries, the craziest people vote. The extremists come out, and that's why you have such extreme politicians getting through these primaries and defeating, and this happens on both sides, by the way, defeating, reasonable sort of middle stream candidates. I think we saw that in Pennsylvania, right, with Fetterman and Connor Lamb. Connor Lamb, if I remember it correctly, was the was the more moderate candidate.
But yeah, he was more moderate than Fetterman, especially in things like his dress code, things like that.
Right. Yeah. So primaries, I was looking that woman up on Twitter who you're talking about, and had seen, and I was looking at it and going, wow, what is this all about? And it's really just that, the extremes in the parties dominate the primaries, and then you get to the general, and there's always been a move back to the middle in the general, but some people are so far where they are that they can't get back to the middle.
So Priscilla, you are the one of us here that actually has a child of school age. I'm sure a person like this would concern you a lot if you had someone in New Hampshire that was running for the head of your child's school program, and they had the idea that pay-per-view executions was a great idea.
I mean, they're not wrong, but I don't think anyone does pay-per-view anymore.
Oh, okay. Well, or what might be the equivalent of it?
Yeah, no, I had enough problems with what's her face.
DeVos?
Yeah, her. And she was relatively benign in the scheme, in the gigantic scheme of things. I think this is where I think things start to get really interesting. I was just listening to the daily podcast. It's from the New York Times, and they were talking about millennials and how we feel about the world right now. And a lot of them are just incredibly disillusioned. It's like, I don't even know at this point that you could bring somebody who's incredibly stable and sane and put them in front of the voters, and they'd be like, oh yeah, cool, because we're so disillusioned and so overwhelmed because it's like constant crisis mode in many ways. And so, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't say assassinations are the way to go because that's a bit extreme, but watching this play out on pay-per-view might actually be more exciting right now than watching it play out in real life.
Yeah. What are you thinking up there, Brooke?
Well, I think that the Republican candidate for governor in North Carolina may have been the individual who said that he wanted to have one vote per family, and that of course would be the man's vote. Yeah, and he was the one that I'd heard. Yep, and I was so outraged. And I spoke with a young family member who will be just turned 13. And I told her that, and she said, they're taking our rights away. And she was very angry. And I said, yeah, they are. And the other woman I've never heard of, but certainly I would be, if anybody like that appeared in New York, I'm positive that that my family, the parents of this family member would be up in arms and would be removing the child from the school, would be homeschooling, would be doing something. There would not be any way that the child would be subjected to this type of suppression or repression. And as far as murdering people, this morning I was listening to Deutsche Welle, and one of the programs was about Putin and his desire for an endless war against the West, and that many Russians, what they've done to preserve their own sanity is simply to tune out. They don't want to think about the war. They don't want to talk about the war. They need to ignore everything in order to retain themselves. Otherwise, they're going to become mentally and emotionally lost. And I think that is one danger that we now in the United States face, with all the barrage and the constant Trumpification of everything, and the far right, and the takeover of the RNC, and the delays, and now the Supreme of the trials, and now the Supreme Court is allowing more delay, and Judge Cannon is somewhere off on what used to be planet Pluto somewhere. People begin to feel helpless, which is the whole point. And instead of saying, no, we're not going to let this stand, we're going to get out there and we're going to vote, and we're not going to be silent, and we're not going to be cowed, and we're not going to do what the Russians are doing. And yeah, no, there is no one coming to save us, unfortunately. And we all have to vote. And the only other choice that one has in a state, if people are voted in whom one cannot abide and whose policies are dangerous, is to move to a state where one can have rights.
Well, yeah.
And that's what makes things so complicated, because moving in and of itself is so hard. It drives me batshit crazy how many times the conservatives are like, well, if you don't like it, just move. Okay, cool. Do you know how hard that is? You know, it's not the easiest thing to do. But on the flip side, just like we've been talking about with Florida, for some folks that's the thing to do. And then what we see happening is almost, and this is where I think what we're talking about starts to, blend into mental health crisis, and what you were just saying, Brooke, about Russia, I think really plays into this, is when people feel imprisoned, when they feel like they have no options, they have no choice, that's exactly what they do. They're going to tune out, because that is the only survival mechanism that's left to them. And I think that's what Russia is demonstrating loud and clear. I think China has done this as well. Any place where there's been any kind of oppressive regime, the people just simply tune out. And then 50 years down the line, people go to interview them and like, wow, how did you let this happen? It's because they tuned it out so much, they didn't recognize what was happening within their governments. Same conversations will happen in the United States 50 years from now. Like, oh my gosh, how did you let this happen? Because everyone tuned out, because we've been in this crazy crisis mode for so long that the only thing we can do, just for the sake of our sanity, is tune out.
Yeah, no, that's true. And as far as moving goes, I was thinking as you were speaking, where people, if they're going to a place like Texas, then you've got a Governor Abbott who changes all the all the voting and control, and attempts to become a mini dictator or micro dictator, however one might put it, in order to retain control of the state. And I mean, the only thing that the government would be able to do would be to remove all the federal assets and take them someplace else and leave the state high and dry.
I was actually watching Chris Chisilla, who used to be on CNN, and he was talking about what they call the Three Stooges effect. The reason that Trump gets so much attention is because he puts out so much bullshit at one time. It's like when the Three Stooges would all try to go through a door at one time and they couldn't get through, they all get stuck. Well, guess what? That's what happens with all the bullshit Trump puts out there. It tries to get through the door to our minds so we can think about it, but it all gets stuck there, so we ignore it.
Yeah, flooding the zone.
Flooding the zone. So all right. So again, we'll go back to the mailbag thing, where Scott's always saying, we have, nobody's coming to our rescue. We have to rescue ourselves from this. And this is, and I'm reading the email. This is a diehard Republican voter in North Carolina who actually lives not more than 45 minutes from me, up in the Asheville area, which is very Democratic. It's a Democratic stronghold up there. But I guess her point is that if North Carolina is willing to put forth these two candidates, one for governor, and the funny thing is that the governor, the gubernatorial candidate, actually right now is the lieutenant governor of North Carolina. I honestly did not know that. It never registered with me because let's face it, who cares who the lieutenant governor is? I mean, what do they do really? I mean, nothing. They go around, they talk every once in a while. They really, it's almost worse than being vice president. So, I mean, her thing is that, if the North Carolina Republican Party is going to put forth these two schmokies for these two very important things, and she actually thinks that the head of the education is even more important as far as being put in, because she says this not only controls a huge budget, and I think North Carolina, the budget's $11 billion, but it controls the mind of our children. This is her concern. So her comment is, and in all due respect to Scott Gershwer, maybe nobody is coming to save us because we're putting up the dumbest people on the face of the earth, the worst human beings. I don't know. I mean, I can see your point.
We've seen it before, right?
Yep, we have.
Herschel Walker.
Yep.
Or what was that guy's name? Murdoch, the one who said, legitimate rape. Used that term,
Dr. Oz.
Yeah, Dr. Oz. Yeah. There's a bunch of them out there. Carrie Lake.
Carrie Lake, who's still around.
Yeah, running for governor.
But that was really her concern.
Running for Senate.
Yeah, running for Senate now. Yeah.
I mean, she's not wrong.
No, she's not.
The person who controls education is, the person who can make the biggest impact on the future generations. The future generations are the ones who are eventually going to be taking care of all of the people who are in the offices right now. So, I mean, but we're seeing that happening already in very subtle ways across the country, ways that various states are chipping away at education. And, this is, I'd love to say this is something new. It's not anything new. It's been happening at least as long as they've been teaching to the test in the various states. And, the whole new Common Core is laughable, So, I mean, it's the right thing to be worried about. It's not the only thing to be worried about, though. It's an incredibly complicated problem.
Well, so this education woman, what was her name, Morrow?
Yes.
I mean, she seems like a QAnon, like Ginny Thomas, like she's saying, yeah, we got to execute them at Gitmo and stuff like that. Just like off the wall, crazy, just not dealing with reality. But I'd go there with Trump too.
It's I mean, look at the Hitler Youth, and they had the boys doing one thing, they had the girls doing something else, and then they had the young pioneers with Stalin, and Putin has got kids doing
indoctrinating kids is should be left to professionals.
Although we do indoctrinate our kids, we've been indoctrinating our kids when we force them to stand up and say the pledge to the flag every day. We make them say one nation under God. Now, if you want to add things that are fun to it, Texas, you do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then you do the Texas State Pledge of Allegiance. And you have to do it. So, I mean, you don't have to do it. You can be someone who, like me, opts for civil disobedience and refuses to say it. But I did get in trouble with my high school teachers for not standing. So,
So you were the original Kaepernick?
I mean,
you took a knee.
You took a knee?
Well, I didn't take a knee. I just didn't stand.
Well, yeah. So now we know where Michael Kaepernick got the idea from. He said, well, I'm not going to sit because there's really nowhere to sit. I'm going to take a knee. He got that from Dr. Priscilla Hobbs. There you go. And I agree. If you look at the world, all the countries in the world, all 208 of them, I believe that there are only 6 with pledges of allegiance. Only 6. United States being one, China another, North Korea another. We're not in good company. We are just not in good company when it comes. And I don't, the Pledge of Allegiance, hey, whatever. But the fact is that, as Priscilla said, if you don't say it, people look at you. In fact, I was at a function, and a young man was going to be giving the talk, and he was not a resident or a citizen of the United States, and they did the Pledge of Allegiance beforehand, and all he did was he turned around, stood at attention, and did nothing, and just stood there, which is the proper conduct if you're not a citizen. And some of the people in the audience really got rather upset. Well, why isn't he showing the respect? He's not a citizen of the United States. It would be more disrespectful for him to participate the way you think he should than doing exactly what he was doing, which is the proper protocol. And my second question to them was, he's a non-citizen. He knew that. You're a citizen. Why the hell didn't you?
I didn't know that. So that's good. But here's another sort of angle on this. I think it's important to learn the rules when you're young. And if the education system works the way it should, and you develop the critical thinking skills for yourself that you should be able to as you grow up, then later on you can decide not to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance or say it or sing the Star Spangled Banner or whatever it is, you know. But I'm all for having kids, you know, do things like pledge allegiance and have them learn these dopey myths about our country that engender some feelings of warmth toward it. Because I think that it is important for them as they're growing up to have that base of loyalty to the country, that then when they're older, they can begin to temper it a little bit with a little like, I do love this country, but I'm not particularly happy with us right now, you know? But I think you have to start with that base first. And so I don't have a real issue with it.
So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this episode. BH Conflict Resolution Services, a full-service dispute resolution firm offering expert and cost-effective mediation services to couples, groups, and businesses. BHCRS can be reached at www.bhcrs.com. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms. We'd like to thank all of our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.